The next speaker is Jim Simmons, who is founder and chief investment officer of ICM Asset Management. He is a chartered financial analyst. He's been around since before I had gray hair, and I've known him that long.
Before I had gray hair, too.
Before you had gray hair, too? And Jim is going to talk about what now as far as investing. And your slides are just go forward.
After listening to Boyd's talk, I think I'm going to add another set of letters to my title, because I'm a CFA and a CIO and all that stuff. I think I'm going to use OMG, occasionally misguided guru. So in the interest of full disclosure, not everything I say works. This is an interesting time. It's a pleasure to be here. It's nice to see a group of people that can smile again. About last March, it was really hard to find anybody that could smile if it had anything to do with investing. What I want to do today, though, is to try to give you a frame of reference for going forward. We have been through the most remarkable transition in the markets of anybody of working age. By that, I mean you had to be 20-something in the 30s to have experienced anything comparable, and we know that anybody of that age would be somewhere in their 90s by now and probably shouldn't be up here talking anyway. There are days when I felt like I was in my 90s in the last year, but so I think our goal, my goal today, is to try to give you a sense of how these changes are starting to bear on going forward. We've had a marvelous rally. It's made everybody feel pretty good. Certainly at least given them a sense of relief, but the challenges and the complexities of investing today have become so much greater by virtue of globalization and other things that we're left with, I think, many more questions than we traditionally expected to encounter as domestically based investors in almost all of the entire post-World War II investment era. So we're going to give this a shot. I want to encourage you to ask questions if you want to. I generally want to walk around and do things, so there'll be a challenge standing in front of this microphone. But I think to start with, we want to be conscious of the fact that what's really happened is the end of the financial world's basically been postponed. Government intervention did work. There are a lot of us, myself included, that have serious misgivings about how some of these pieces worked. But the willingness to get aggressively in front of the problems has made a difference. We got out there with enough trillions of dollars, tragically that's the number that it takes, to start turning the psychology to bottom the markets. But as a result, we ended up with a meltdown that was averted so far. I think that's a fair assumption that it will continue to be averted. And we are seeing some positive effects from the economy. Most people will agree that the economy at this point is stabilizing. I don't think that's too hard to defend at this point. And there's a presumption of growth that has reemerged. Quite honestly, I'm not sure how much growth we can assume. And one of the assumptions we're going to challenge here is how much growth you really can expect coming out of this economy, the U.S.-based economy, in the coming quarters. The rest of the world basically has the same kind of prognosis, certainly the developed world. Europe is creeping forward. It's about like the U.S., but the EU just came out with forecasts for most of the governments in the EU just 2 days ago. The indication was that virtually all of the federal deficits for all of the major economies in Europe will be greater than they were previously expected to be. So there's nothing rosy about the European recovery, even though, again, it is better than it was. Japan is at a similar stage. Somewhat a recovery. They're dependent on exports more than many, and the problem is a lot of the developing world just isn't importing like it was, but stable once again. The Chinese economic stimulus seems to be working. There's a tremendous amount of focus on China as a factor in this. I think we're overdoing it to a degree. There are serious questions about just how credible their expansion really is, which I'll address in a few minutes. And if you take the next largest economy by population, India, they've actually muddled along pretty good so far. They didn't use the same degree of stimulus that we did in the U.S. and China and some of the other developed economies. Their challenge in the short run is going to be a potentially serious drought that could affect their agricultural output, and they're still highly agrarian as a society. The challenge, therefore, will be to try to make their way through that. We've had the rally, as I mentioned. The S&P is up over 50%, each day a little more. Most amazingly to me, with the maximum anxiety having peaked back at the bottom in March, we've got stabilization in the credit markets, but we don't have credit availability. The fear that everything was going to come unraveled in the financial system has passed, but I don't know if any of you know anyone trying to roll over a significant commercial real estate loan right now. It's virtually impossible to do. Because most banks are taking such large losses against their reserves, against their common equity, the end result is they cannot support the loan portfolio they have. The ratios simply don't work out. In a nutshell, if you cut the reserves that you have by constantly writing off loan losses, the ratios that are required for a bank have to stay the same, and if the common equity goes down, the amount of assets, loans that the bank has to come down to keep up. That's why a lot of banks simply aren't lending. They can't sustain or stabilize the equity sufficiently to get the job done. So until that stops happening, or until they all go out and do endless amounts of common equity offerings, there isn't going to be a lot of lendable funds in the system. And then last, consumer confidence has also been stabilizing. We've seen gradual upticks in consumer confidence from the University of Michigan surveys and from the Conference Board surveys, but the truth is these numbers are still so far above where they were at the norm when people were generally upbeat that statistically we got 20 points to go on these surveys. One of the challenges that has to be addressed, I think, continuously in trying to size up investing going forward is what is a green shoot and does it really turn into anything or not? Our sense is coming from the eastern part of Washington State where it is still something of an agrarian economy. If you don't get enough rain, the green shoots dry up and blow away, and there is some challenge in that regard. In terms of what it's done, though, in terms of year-to-date, to give people a perspective, the S&P is up 50% off of its March 9th low, but it's only up 15% for the year-to-date through the September 4th date. The Russell 2000, a proxy for small cap, has been very similar. High-yield bonds, and I just pulled PIMCO's high-yield bond fund out, is up about 30%. So, in fact, the high-yield bond market has done twice as well as the broad U.S. indices. And the foreign markets have just been remarkable. They're up in the 60% range. They tended to peak earlier and to bottom earlier, so to some degree there may be some explanation for why they're 60 and we're 15 relative to difference in timings of bottoms and rallies, but clearly there's a lot of money flowing into the emerging markets with the belief that's where the future lies. I happen to agree with that. The question is, what do you pay for it?